Okay, number 8 on my list of things TNA must do to improve their product is they need to stop marginalizing the X Division. You know, I mean, from day one in TNA, the X Division was the most exciting thing about the company. I mean, even back in the early days when they had no real star power on their, and their main event scene was so bare that they basically had to fill it with Jeff Jarrett versus BG James or whatever. People would still tune in because of the X Division, because no matter how weak the top of the card might be, you always had guys like AJ Styles and Jerry Lynn and Low Key to give you incredible matches and make those weekly pay-per-views worth your money. And the fact that the X Division was what gave TNA its first real sense of identity. I mean, you could watch a WWE show and some super talented wrestler whose only real problem is that he's not 6'5", 350 pounds, and he's getting fed to the Big Show or the Undertaker to be destroyed in 5 seconds. And then you could turn to a TNA show, and you'd see wrestlers the same size as that guy or smaller, and they're blowing the roof off the place. They're competing with those bigger guys, and a lot of the time they're even going over the bigger guys. And that was really what drove home the point. I mean, they made people realize that, oh my God, here's a company where it's not about who's the biggest, it's about who's the best. And for several years that was one of TNA's main selling points. That's what sucked people in, the amazing X Division matches. In fact, it was taken to such a huge level of importance that they actually had the X Division title defended in the main event of a pay-per-view. Back then when it was AJ and Daniels and Joe and the division was on fire, that was when it was at its absolute peak. But then after that feud ended and those 3 guys started to move out of the X Division and onto other things, all that focus and all that attention kind of left with them. And then the creative team was left with a bunch of guys who, while they were all very talented, they didn't really have the same flair that AJ, Daniels, and Joe did. They tried to fill the void with Chris Sabin for a while, which was a good choice, and Sabin's probably the best wrestler in the X Division outside of those 3 guys. But back then, Sabin was still a character in search of an identity. This was before the Motor City Machine Guns. He hadn't really figured out who he was yet. Hence, there was some experimenting. There was, there was that terrible Jackass angle, which is better left forgotten. At one point they did an angle where Kevin Nash tried to destroy the X Division, where he attacked a bunch of guys from behind, and then he beat Sabin at a pay-per-view using dirty tactics, and then conveniently got injured before Sabin could get the win back. There was also a problem of, except for maybe Jerry Lynn, they didn't really have any really credible opponents that Sabin could have great feuds with. As a result, I mean, they would go for weeks at a time where Sabin wouldn't even appear on Impact at all. And Alex Shelley even said in an interview that he and Sabin came up with the idea for the Motor City Machine Guns tag team and took it to the writers themselves because the writers didn't have anything for them to do as singles wrestlers. And Sabin was still the champion at the time. And if your writers can't come up with anything for your X Division champion to do, that's a sign that something's really wrong. I mean, then the Motor City Machine Guns started getting really popular. The Black Machismo gimmick took off, and the rest is history. Now, fast forward to the present. We've got Team 3D trying to destroy the X Division. But the thing is, they weren't feuding with the entire division. They were feuding with 3 representatives of it. 2 guys who are tag team wrestlers now and haven't competed seriously in the X Division in quite a while. And Jay Lethal, who through some really bad booking was made to look like an absolutely terrible X Division champion. The rest of the guys in the division, Sanjay Dutt, Petey Williams, Elix Skipper, Shark Boy, etc., they were basically beat-up dummies for 3D, and after they were all decimated, they never really got any of that heat back. Plus, to sell the feud with 3D, the writers decided to totally de-emphasize the X Division and put the focus on Sabin, Shelley, and Lethal, and for the most part, put everyone else in the division on the shelf for 3 months. And now that we can look back on this whole thing in hindsight, the feud with 3D did something for the Motor City Machine Guns as far as establishing them, putting them on the map as a tag team, but it ended up being just incredibly damaging to everybody else. I mean, except for Sabin and Shelley, the whole division got demolished by 3D, and the fact that it took Jay Lethal literally months to get his title belt back after they stole it made him look like an even worse champion than before and reflected really badly on the division as a whole. And yeah, they put Jay Lethal over huge against all odds, but one big win at a pay-per-view is not nearly enough to rectify 2 months' worth of character assassination. So now we're left with an X Division full of wrestlers who got crushed by one tag team and quite possibly the worst booked X Division champion in TNA history for reasons that I've stated about 1,000 times before. And lately I've been looking back trying to figure out where this all started to go downhill, and it's pretty obvious that it began when the AJ Daniels-Joe feud wrapped up. And Billy Doug discussed this in one of their videos, how TNA put all their eggs in one basket with this feud, and they didn't really have a plan for what to do after it ended, which is why the division then got so de-emphasized. And perhaps an even bigger problem than that was the fact that Samoa Joe left the division and moved into the world title picture. Because more than anyone else, Samoa Joe was the guy who really allowed the division to earn its motto. Because when the fans saw this big Samoan powerhouse, who was obviously a future world champion, and he was doing all these amazing high-risk spots and matching all the smaller, agile, acrobatic wrestlers move for move, the fans realized that in TNA, weight and size really don't mean anything. Now, the smaller guys can hang with the bigger guys and vice versa, because it's not about weight limits, it's about no limits. But then Joe moved into the world title picture. The X Division kind of lost its identity because of that, because without any of those bigger guys like Joe to compete with, it became more and more like a generic cruiserweight division. Anyway, it lost what made it special. And around that time was when the creative team clearly started to lose interest in it. Then there was the Kevin Nash feud. It was the 3D feud, both of which ended up doing more harm than good. And that brings us to the rather sorry state of the X Division today. So, long story short, TNA is in a position now where it needs to pretty much rebuild the X Division from the ground up. And despite the problems that I've been discussing, I think that's very doable. First, the creative team needs to put the focus back on the division. Devote a good-sized chunk of time every week to the X Division stars. Let them go out there and have amazing matches again. They get good time and aren't ruined by constant commercial breaks or outside interference or overbooking like they used to back in 2005. And I know the division isn't as stacked as it used to be. AJ and Joe are doing other things now. Aries and Strong went back to the independents. Saban and Shelley are in the tag team division. But it's not like there's no one left at all. You still got Petey Williams, you still got Sanjay Dutt, who's long overdue for a run with the belt. You've got Shark Boy, who's getting really over with this new gimmick. There's Curry Man, and I think most of us know who he really is under that monkey suit, so we know he can have great matches. There's guys like Jimmy Rave and Homicide. There's a lot of great talent in there. TNA's just got to utilize it. Also, I had an idea that might sound a little bit out there, but just go with me on this for a minute. I think it would be very, very interesting if the creative team had Hernandez start competing in the X Division. Because Hernandez is the same kind of wrestler as Samoa Joe. He's a big, strong powerhouse who's also athletic and agile enough to work that high-risk, no-limit style. I mean, watch his matches. That guy does suicide dives over the top rope all the time with no trouble at all. And for someone his size, that's amazing. You put Hernandez in there, you have him hang with those smaller guys, matching their high-risk moves just like Joe did, and he's not squashing them. That's important. He's not squashing them. He's having competitive matches. And I think that could go a long way toward helping the X Division regain that no weight limits identity that it lost when Samoa Joe moved into the world title picture. And the writers clearly aren't interested in pushing LAX as a tag team right now for reasons I don't understand. So, why the hell not? This is definitely something to consider, I think.